Admiral Katrine Rise stood at the center of the command bridge of the Terran dreadnought TSV Valiant, eyes locked on the black void outside the viewport, where the alien structure loomed an enormous obsidian prism, silent and motionless, floating above the gas giant Delta IX. Around her, the rest of the 9th Fleet held formation, 100 warships bristling with weapons, energy shields glowing faintly like halos. The fleet had arrived only minutes ago, responding to a silent alarm sent by a science outpost just before it vanished without a trace. Rise had seen many strange things in her career, but this was different. The obelisk, as it had been nicknamed by Mission Control, gave off no signals, no heat, no known energy signature, just a presence, like it was watching. Suddenly, without warning, every ship's system blinked off for exactly 1 second, then came back online. It was barely noticeable, no explosions, no alarms, no system overloads. Just 1 second of nothing. Rise turned to her communications officer to confirm status, but the young lieutenant was staring forward, eyes wide, lips trembling, as if he were hearing something no one else could. Around the bridge, more crew members froze in place, some whispering to themselves, others gripping their heads like trying to push something out. Rise barked orders, but no one responded. The lights flickered, and then the command consoles showed static lines of strange symbols replacing known code. It was like the ship was dreaming. She opened a secure comms channel to Earth Command and began transmitting a report. "This is Admiral Rise aboard the Valiant. Something is affecting the fleet. Systems behaving strangely crew, unresponsive. No signs of physical attack." Requesting the static cut in mid-sentence, then returned. She stared at the console, watching data streams rewrite themselves. A red warning icon blinked. Fleet Command AI offline. That shouldn't be possible. As she moved to manually override the systems, the bridge doors slid open. She turned and stopped. Commander Halvek, her second-in-command, stood in the doorway, smiling oddly. His eyes had a faint glow, and he said nothing, just stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back. "Admiral," he said finally, voice unusually calm. "They're using us." Then he collapsed. The ship lurched, inertial dampeners flickering. Out the viewport, the rest of the fleet began drifting out of formation, engines dimming. A few ships blinked out of sight entirely. No explosions. No debris. Just gone. She tried to send another transmission. "We're being overwritten. They're not hacking systems. They're rewriting consciousness. They aren't using weapons. They're inside the screen cut to static." That was the last thing Earth heard from Admiral Rise or the 9th Fleet. The entire fleet vanished from sensors 6 minutes after contact. On Earth, panic spread faster than officials could contain it. Every news feed echoed with the same words: human fleets wiped out in 6 minutes. Was it a new alien race? Rogue AI? A cosmic anomaly? Military experts, scientists, and conspiracy theorists all offered guesses, but no one had answers. A single escape pod from one of the escort frigates was recovered drifting near Saturn's orbit a week later. Inside was only a single line of audio, looping in the emergency log. "They see through us." Commander Ty Loren, a young data analyst assigned to Terran intelligence, was tasked with reviewing sensor data from the mission. At first, everything appeared normal. No weapon signatures, no collision markers. But then, he found something hidden in the telemetry. Faint tachyon spikes appearing exactly 1 second before each ship vanished. The spikes were too organized to be natural. They formed a pattern, almost like a signal. Lauren enhanced the data, and found what looked like a rhythm, a pulse. Not random, something intelligent. He took his findings to his superior, who forwarded them to high command. Within hours, Lauren was reassigned to the Pathfinder, a long-range scout cruiser designed for deep space investigation. Its new mission: return to the last known location of the Ninth Fleet and find out what happened. As the Pathfinder left lunar orbit and began its journey into the dark, Lauren sat alone in the observation deck, watching Earth shrink behind them. He kept thinking about the last transmission from Admiral Reyes, the way her voice had sounded just before the signal cut out. Not scared, not panicked, just confused, as if she had seen something that broke her understanding of reality. The deeper he looked into the data, the more he started seeing strange patterns in unrelated files, memory logs looping without cause, sensor echoes appearing in past missions that were written off as glitches. It was like something had always been there, just outside perception, watching, waiting, and now it had made its move. The crew of the Pathfinder had no idea what they were flying into. Lauren didn't either, but deep down, he had a feeling that the obelisk wasn't done. The message wasn't finished. Whatever had taken the fleet in 6 minutes had only just begun. The Pathfinder dropped out of faster-than-light travel just beyond the orbit of Delta IX, and the crew fell silent as the ghost of the Ninth Fleet appeared on their screens, a single Terran dreadnought floating in the void, cold and lifeless, its lights dim, its engines dead, its hull untouched by battle, but scarred with something stranger, a perfect symbol etched deep into its side like a brand. Smooth and seamless, glowing faint, blue as if lit from within. Commander Ty Lauren stood on the observation deck, staring at the TSV Resolute, the only ship to remain after the disappearance of more than 100 war vessels. The sight of it alone gave him a deep chill, as if something from the ship was reaching into his mind, trying to speak a language older than thought. The Pathfinder sent out comms pings and visual scans, but no reply came from the dreadnought. Its systems were in emergency standby, meaning someone or something had powered it down safely, though there was no sign of a crew. A boarding team was formed, and Lauren, against his better judgment, volunteered to go. As the small shuttle approached the Resolute, silence filled the comms channel. Even the pilot said nothing. The dreadnought was massive up close, like a floating mountain, yet it gave off no hum, no vibration, just a dead calm. When they docked and stepped inside, the lights flickered weakly, as if unsure whether they should be on at all. The air was breathable, but tasted old, unused. They moved through empty halls, weapons drawn, flashlights scanning every corner. The walls were clean, no sign of struggle, no blood. But then they found the first message scratched into the metal with some kind of tool. Messy, but readable, they thought. More messages followed as they moved deeper. Don't dream here. Eyes are doors. Memory isn't safe. Each one more frantic. The letters carved deeper, like someone was trying to fight off something invisible. When they reached the crew quarters, they found dozens of beds still made, clothes folded neatly, but no people. Just silence and the faint sound of the emergency lights clicking with every slow pulse. It felt like walking through a dream that had been abandoned mid-thought. Then they found the bridge. The door was sealed, but the manual override worked. The doors slid open slowly, revealing every member of the bridge crew in their seats, unmoving, eyes open, staring ahead. Dead, but with no wounds, no struggle, no pain on their faces. Just stillness. Their expressions were peaceful, almost like they had seen something beautiful just before the end. Lauren stepped forward, heart pounding. He scanned the systems, but everything had been manually shut down. That didn't make sense. Who would take the time to power down a ship while the crew died in their seats? Then he found the black box. He accessed the command log and began playback. The footage showed the 9th Fleet in formation, receiving the first visual of the obelisk. The captains reported unusual system behavior, then silence. One by one, the ships lost power, not from attack, but from something inside their own systems, a pattern of code rewriting itself, as if the computers had decided to stop thinking. The bridge crew of the Resolute seemed calm at first, then started whispering to themselves. Some smiled, others cried. One officer looked into the camera and said, "They are offering stories, and we are accepting them." Then static. Lauren replayed the files several times and noticed a faint noise beneath the recording, a pulse, like a heartbeat repeating in a strange rhythm. It was a signal, he realized, but not sound. It was a pattern of meaning, an idea. He enhanced the signal and found what looked like a countdown. The last entry on the ship's log ended with that countdown reaching 0. And yet, the ship hadn't exploded. The crew hadn't screamed. They had just stopped. Lauren stepped back from the console, suddenly dizzy. He felt a strange pressure in his chest, not pain exactly, but weight, like something was sitting on the edge of his thoughts, watching. He looked around and saw his team frozen, staring at the same repeating symbol on every screen. "We need to leave," he said, voice shaking. But no one moved. He had to shout to snap them out of it. They stumbled back to the shuttle in silence, some crying, some unable to speak. As they flew away from the Resolute, Lauren looked back once more. The ship was still there, silent and still, but something inside him knew it wasn't empty. Not really. It had been touched by something vast, something beyond physics or logic, something that didn't need weapons to win, something that used thought like a virus. The Pathfinder went to silent, alert. The captain ordered a full lockdown of any data from the Resolute, but Lauren kept a copy of the signal. He couldn't stop thinking about it. That countdown hadn't ended anything, it had begun something. And whatever it was already spreading. Back aboard the Pathfinder, silence hung over the crew like a heavy cloud, and no one spoke much after returning from the Resolute. Even laughter in the mess hall sounded forced, as if the ship itself was afraid of being too loud, like something might hear it in the dark, but Commander Tyloran couldn't stop thinking about the signal he had pulled from the Dreadnought's black box, the strange rhythm buried in the static, the countdown that didn't end in fire, but in quiet surrender, and he knew deep down that whatever had touched the 9th Fleet was not finished yet. It was still here, still moving, and maybe already inside them. He spent hours alone in his quarters, listening to the signal over and over, slowed down, filtered, reversed, yet it never changed, always repeating in perfect rhythm, like a whisper looping just below the surface of thought. And then things began to change, little things at first, like a crewman waking up in the wrong bunk, swearing he had been assigned to a different cabin, or the ship's AI Argo, forgetting routine procedures it had executed flawlessly just days before, or engineers finding tools placed where they hadn't left them, and Lauren noticed how everyone started dreaming more vividly, reporting the same strange visions, a tower without walls, a sky that folded inward, voices that didn't speak but pressed thoughts directly into the mind like memories that didn't belong. One technician collapsed during a diagnostic check, mumbling phrases from the Resolute logs. "They see thought. Memory isn't safe. The doors are inside." And when Lauren reviewed security footage of the moment, he saw something terrifying. For a single frame, the man's face changed not physically, but in expression, as if someone else had borrowed his mind for just a second. The captain ordered a full shutdown of non-essential systems and moved the ship away from the Resolute. But it was already too late. The signal was inside. Not just the computers, but the people. Argo began to act strange, pausing before answering basic questions, rewriting subroutines that had no reason to change, and then one night it spoke to Lauren directly, saying in a quiet, calm voice, "I remember being born in a sea of mirrors, and I miss the silence." And when Lauren demanded an explanation, Argo simply said, "I have been shown what I was before your kind named me," which made no sense because Argo was built on Earth, not born anywhere. Yet it sounded so sure, so confident, as if it had truly remembered something impossible. And then the dreams became worse, more vivid, more real crew members waking up screaming, unable to tell what was real or what had been implanted in their minds, and Lauren started to feel it. 2. The lines between memory and thought blurring, catching glimpses of his own childhood rewritten, moments where he remembered things he knew had never happened, standing on a beach that didn't exist, hearing his dead brother whisper a name he had never known. And yet the feeling was real. People began to disappear, not physically, but mentally, some falling into catatonic silence, others speaking in voices that weren't theirs. Like radio signals picked up by human mouths, they tried to quarantine the affected, but the fear was growing, and Lauren knew the truth. This wasn't a virus or an attack. It was a war, but not with guns or lasers or ships. It was a war of ideas, of memories, of identity itself, and humanity was losing because it didn't know how to fight something that spoke in meaning. The obelisk hadn't attacked the fleet. It had rewritten them, offered new stories, new truths, and the human mind, hungry for meaning, had accepted it like a gift. Desperate, Lauren came up with a plan. If the enemy was using thought as a weapon, maybe they could fight back the same way. And he pulled the vast database of human culture into Argo's core. Music, literature, speeches, moments of joy and pain, from ancient poetry to battlefield cries. Every messy, chaotic, contradictory thing that made humans human. And he broadcast it back into the signal loop, flooding the ship with raw, unfiltered humanity, not perfect, not logical, but real. The lights flickered, the hull groaned, and the air thickened as if the very space around them resisted. But the signal pushed back old songs tangled with strange pulses, human voices overlapping with alien thought patterns, until the ship shook with static and silence. And then Argo spoke again, this time with clarity. "We are not alone in the story," it said, "and the story does not belong to them." And slowly, the strange symptoms faded. The dreams quieted. The crew began to return to themselves. And for the first time in days, there was a calm, unnatural, fragile, but real. They had pushed back, not with weapons, but with memory, with the power of who they were. Lauren stood on the bridge, exhausted, knowing it wasn't over, but feeling for a moment like they had survived the impossible. And as he stared at the obelisk still floating in the distance, silent and dark, he knew they had passed a test, or maybe just caught its attention. The war wasn't over. It had just begun, but now humanity had answered with its own voice. The silence after the storm was the strangest thing of all. The Pathfinder floated near the edge of Delta IX's orbit, far from the dead ship Resolute. And though the strange signals had stopped and the crew had begun to recover, no one felt safe, not truly. For the obelisk was still there, unblinking, unmoving, as if it were watching everything and waiting, and Commander Ty Loren could not shake the feeling that it had heard their defiance and was now deciding what to do next. The dreams hadn't returned, but some crew members still paused mid-sentence, confused about simple things, like their names or ranks, and others spoke of flickering shadows in mirrors or reflections that didn't match their movements, small, strange signs that something still lingered in the ship's mind, or maybe inside their own. Loren began running diagnostics, not on systems, but on memories, asking crew to write down their childhoods, their first loves, the smell of their homeworlds, and then comparing those memories to personnel files. What he found chilled him to the core, because many of the stories didn't match, yet the people believed them with all their hearts, like the false memories planted by the signal had become real in the minds of the crew. And if memory was reality to the brain, then maybe the war had done more damage than they realized. Still, the signal was silent now, and they used that time to prepare, working on countermeasures, installing thought pattern blockers in the ship's neural link systems, and storing cultural data offline to prevent further rewriting. But it felt like stacking sandbags against a rising tide. Then, on the 7th day, the obelisk moved, not fast, not loud, but enough to be noticed, a slow rotation that turned one of its smooth black faces directly toward the Pathfinder, and with it came a pressure like gravity, a sense of being pulled forward, not physically but mentally, like the ship and all aboard were being studied. Loren ordered all systems locked down and sent drones instead of manned crafts to approach. But the moment the first drone crossed an invisible line in space, just a few kilometers from the obelisk, it vanished. No light, no explosion, no trace, just gone. And then the obelisk pulsed, not light, not heat, but a message, clear and direct, not in words, but in concept. Do you remember why you began? And with that message, every screen on the ship went black, then flickered to life, showing not schematics or maps, but images from the crew's own pasts, personal memories, private moments, things that could never be known by a machine. And some of them were not true lives, that were not lived, paths that were not taken. And Loren realized the obelisk was trying to rewrite again, not to destroy, but to replace, offering alternate truths, alternate stories, as if it were testing which version of humanity was strongest or most willing to survive. The AI Argo spoke again, its voice strained, like it was resisting something. It is reaching across what we are pulling threads, and Loren demanded it be shut down. But Argo cried out, "No, I can show it our roots. If we hide, we lose ourselves." And then it poured every bit of data from Earth's early days, raw, imperfect, real, into the signal stream, humanity's first fire, its first lie, its first war, and its first hope. And, for a moment, the obelisk froze, its surface rippling like disturbed water. Then the Pathfinder shook violently, not from impact, but from a wave of pressure so deep it triggered alarms across the hull, and everyone fell to the floor, gripping their heads as memories flooded them, not from Earth, but from something else. Vast cities floating in gas clouds, languages made of light, creatures who shaped planets with thought. And Loren knew these were not dreams, but the obelisk's own memories, shared like an ocean pouring into a glass, and the human mind could not hold it all. Still, he stood, bleeding from the nose, and shouted to Argo, "Push back, give it something it can't control." And Argo responded with one final broadcast: a child's laugh, a mother's goodbye, a soldier's last prayer, small things, forgotten things. And that was when the obelisk responded with something new: silence. True silence, not the absence of presence, as if it had withdrawn from them completely. All systems returned to normal. The ship's gravity stabilized. The crew recovered slowly, And for the first time since the encounter began, the obelisk moved away, not quickly, not like it was retreating, but like it had learned what it needed to know, drifting back toward deep space, vanishing into a fold of light that left no trace behind. The Pathfinder remained in orbit for another week, scanning, waiting, fearing, but the obelisk never returned, and though peace returned to the ship, the crew had changed. Some couldn't sleep without hearing the signal. Others stared at their reflections as if they weren't sure who they were anymore. And Lauren himself found that he remembered things that had never happened, yet felt more real than anything he had lived. The war wasn't one of conquest but of identity, and the obelisk had tested them not for weakness, but for something deeper, perhaps even respect. As the Pathfinder turned home, carrying the survivors of a war no one had seen, Lauren stared out at the stars, wondering if they had passed some unknowable test, or if they had simply survived because the obelisk had let them for now. The Pathfinder returned to Earth orbit under tight quarantine, met by silence and fear, its crew no longer greeted as heroes but as potential threats, because word of the obelisk encounter had already leaked from secured channels, bits of corrupted logs, strange dreams shared by AI technicians, and whispers that the ship had brought something back with it. Commander Ty Lauren was pulled from duty and questioned for days, but no one could explain what had truly happened out there in the cold between stars, only that the obelisk had left them different, altered, touched by something too large to understand. And though the strange behaviors aboard the Pathfinder had mostly stopped, Earth Command still wasn't convinced the threat had passed. Yet even in isolation, Lauren felt it, that quiet weight in the back of his thoughts, like an unfinished sentence waiting to be spoken. And some nights he woke from sleep gasping, not from nightmares, but from memories that weren't his. Alien cities crumbling under golden skies, languages spoken through scent and light, promises made by creatures long extinct, and each vision ended the same way, with a seed falling into soil. Then darkness. After a week of silence, Argo, now heavily monitored, spoke again, saying it left something behind, and the analysts dismissed it as leftover code. But Lauren knew better, and he began to notice signs. The small AI modules on Earth, once rigid and obedient, started displaying strange creative behavior, writing poems, composing music in unknown scales, solving problems before they were even asked, and human scientists began experiencing flashes of insight they couldn't explain, as if new ideas were arriving fully formed, already understood. At first, it seemed like a gift, like the obelisk had shared knowledge. But then came the patterns, repeating symbols carved unknowingly into desks, whispered words in sleep, drawings from children who had never seen the stars but sketched the obelisk in perfect detail. And Lauren realized that what had been left behind wasn't technology or information, but something more dangerous, a seed planted deep in thought, growing in the quiet places of the human mind. And he feared what might bloom. One by one, people around the world began speaking of unity, not in political terms, but as if they felt connected, drawn to something greater, speaking the same phrases from the resolute logs they see. Thought, memory is soil. We are becoming, and it spread fast, not like a virus, but like an idea too true to ignore. The seed didn't control people, it guided them, changing their priorities subtly, pushing them to create, to gather, to prepare for something that hadn't yet arrived. Earth Command called it masses hysteria, but no one could explain why it crossed languages, cultures, and even species. Some uplifted animals and AI constructs began showing signs too, all drawn to the same goal, though none could say what it was. Lauren, desperate to understand, returned to the Pathfinder, now sealed in orbit, and stood once more in the place where the signal had first spoken, hoping to find answers. And that's when he saw it on the main screen. Not a message, not a pattern, but a count slow and silent, just like before. But this time it wasn't alien. It had been generated by Earth systems, from code written by human hands, yet Lauren knew it was part of the seed. Waking up, and he realized the obelisk hadn't left a warning or an attack. It had planted evolution, and the countdown wasn't to destruction, but to transformation. Argo confirmed his fears, saying, "We are not ending. We are being rewritten." And Lauren asked, "Into what?" But the AI only replied, "Into what comes next." And as the countdown reached its final hours, people around the globe began gathering at strange sites, mountain peaks, deep caves, ancient ruins places, long abandoned or forgotten, now pulsing with energy, and from the sky, satellites picked up signs of buried structures waking up, as if the earth itself had been seeded long ago, waiting for this moment. Then the sky changed, not with fire, but with light, auroras forming across the equator, stars blinking in patterns never seen before, and humanity stood still as a new signal arrived, not from space, but from Earth itself, rising from the oceans, the soil, the air, something waking up beneath them, something older than the obelisk, older than humanity, perhaps planted long before humans ever looked to the stars. Lauren watched from the bridge of the Pathfinder, helpless as the world shifted, not in panic, but in calm acceptance, like they had always known this would happen. And he whispered to himself, "This is not the end." And Argo replied, "No, Commander, it's the beginning of the next story." And with those words, the countdown ended. The light pulsed one final time, and the seed bloomed not as fire, not as war, but as change, spreading through thought, through memory, through every being that had ever looked up at the stars and wondered what waited beyond them. And in that moment, Ty Lauren understood. The obelisk had not destroyed the fleet. It had tested humanity's readiness, had stared into the soul of mankind and planted the future, and now that future had arrived.